Hello, everyone. Welcome in. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody, depending on where you are at. This will be the final episode here in our current series on 3 Up, 3 Down. This current series is breaking down the 4-umpire system for the 60-foot diamond here. We've been in now a 5-week kind of overview and outline of what exactly is going on and with the 4-umpire system, and we're real excited to go ahead and wrap that up today with taking a look at the responsibilities of U2 in a 4-umpire system. Now, last week when we met, we talked a lot about U1 and U3, the wing umpires, and their responsibilities. Remember, I kind of talked to you guys at the start of this whole series of going whole part whole. We started with the rotations, big picture wise, kind of broke it down with general responsibilities, and now we're kind of circling back to some review. Last week was on the jobs of U1 and U3, and then today we'll take a look at U2. And the one kind of disclaimer that I'll have here about U2 as we kind of start to think about the job that U2 has is that we have options for U2. And even though the manual does kind of outline some specific things, and I'll make sure that we address that too, there is a lot of different options that U2 actually has to go ahead and choose initial starting positions, whether to be inside or outside in terms of pivoting and things like that on routine balls and things like that. So my goal here is just kind of give you some food for thought on each of those decisions. The beauty of the manual is that it allows you to make those decisions for yourself. So there is some latitude for us, not only in selecting an initial starting position, but then also kind of figuring out where exactly we want to pivot into the working area versus not on routine balls. And we'll go ahead and cover that here later on in the conversation today. But that is essentially where we're going. Now, that's our overview here, a couple of announcements and things like that before we go ahead and get started. First off and foremost here, this is not a wedge presentation. We'll definitely talk about the wedge and how exactly some of the fundamentals of point of base, for example, will allow us to get to the wedge. If you're somebody who's looking for some more wedge resources, last week we introduced Will Little, a major league umpire who has offered a lot of guidelines and some insight in outlining the process of the wedge at first and third. So we gave those links last week. This week we've got some stuff from Will Little at second base. So DJ, you can go ahead and link that one in the chat here. Working second base here and trying to find the wedge at second with Will Little. Again, Major League Baseball umpire there outlines that one. And then secondly, we actually did a series back in September on 3 Up, 3 Down as U2. Now, as U2, we took a look at not only the 60-foot diamond, but also the bigger diamonds and some concepts there too. So if some of this stuff that we're going to go over today, you're looking for us to dive a little bit deeper into with regards to U2, I encourage you to look at Will Little's video that DJ will have linked in the chat. And then secondly, revisit some of the episodes from September 2020 in 3 Up, 3 Down, which took a look then at the wedge at U2. So those are some things then to kind of think about here as we go through the presentation. Now, again, we want to stick to the 60-foot diamond here today. And as we look specifically at the 60-foot diamond, what we really want to do is kind of figure out what exactly are the general requirements and responsibilities of U2 and how can we effectively position as U2. And that then is our main focal point. Basic responsibilities of U2, where exactly U2 should move and position for balls on the infield, routine balls to the outfield, positioning for steals and back picks will also be discussed. And then the concepts of rimming and sliding will also be talked about here too, or rimming and slipping as well. So that's what we've got on tap here for us today. Before I go ahead and get presenting here and going through a lot of the things that we've got on tap, does anybody have any questions or any announcements or anything like that to throw us into it, as many of us are in the throes of the district tournament here right now in July, early July of 2021? Anything to add here? All right. Well, without further ado, then, let's go ahead and dive right on into the content that we've got here on tap for us today. As I mentioned, focal point here is U2, and we'll go right into that one. And the first thing that I want to go ahead and do with U2 is review some of the basic responsibilities that we've talked about so far in working as U2, and we'll go ahead and do that here now. Now, as always, if you got any questions or things like that, I'll pause briefly throughout. You can drop them in the chat, and DJ and Seth can either take them or we'll go ahead and bring them up for food for thought as well. So continue to use the chat here to drop any questions or just ask them when we go ahead and pause there as well. Now, let's take a look here at some of the basic responsibilities of U2, and these are some of the things that we've covered in the weeks prior to this point. So first off and foremost, remember that U2's area of responsibility for catch no catch is essentially the V. And what we mean by the V is that anything that is requiring the right fielder to move straight in and straight back, including the center fielder straight in and straight back, all the way to the left fielder, straight in and straight back. So if you kind of think about that V in that area, that's everything for which then U2 is responsible for going out on trouble balls for catch no catch. That's just a brief review of areas of responsibility here of U2. U2 is also responsible in the full rotation for either pivoting inside the working area, and we'll kind of talk about why that may be a good idea and what may be some alternative ideas to use as well. So in the full rotation, we'll continue to see U2 responsible for only second base. And then in the fill rotation, if you remember the fill rotation used with runners in scoring position, that's when U2 will have to pivot into the working area because he or she is responsible for plays at both second and third base. And then those are generally the responsibilities. So you've got catch, no catch, and then what U2 is required to do then here with full and fill rotations. Now, full and fill rotations and what U2 is required to do is important to note because as we start to talk about initial starting positions, what is required of U2, particularly in rotation, may make a decision for you or may determine for you whether you choose the B or C positions as we talk about here situationally as U2. Now, the other thing to also kind of mention here with U2 as we move away from general responsibilities is what I just mentioned here in the introduction to the conversation today, and that is the fact that U2 has some latitude to decide for himself or for herself what exactly they want to do with the initial starting position and things of that nature. So again, the beauty of the manual is that yes, it does offer some suggestions, but at the same time, it also says that we can kind of decide for ourselves what is most comfortable and most applicable for our skill set, our abilities, and things like that individually. So as we talk about initial starting position, choosing B or C, and talking about choosing B or C situationally, we'll give you some things to think about, and then from there, you can determine for yourself whether B or C is more appropriate for you in various situations. Now, regardless here, remember the priorities, and we talked about these last week as both U1 and U3. We want to take an initial starting position, regardless of situation where runners are at or things like that, but we want an initial starting position that, number one, affords freedom of movement. Now, last week when we talked about U1 and U3, we only had one fielder to provide freedom of movement for, and typically that was either the first baseman as U1 or the third baseman as U3. Here is U2 when we have to afford freedom of movement. We have two fielders essentially involved. That then would be the second baseman and the shortstop, and potentially even the center fielder in some cases as well. So we want to make sure we choose an initial starting position that, number one, affords freedom of movement. Secondly, allows us to arrive where we need to be on time. So if it's in the full or fill rotation, we want to make sure that we choose a pre-pitch starting position that isn't so deep that we don't have to run so far to get into position or arrive where we need to be on time. And then lastly, to be in the best position possible. So we want to make sure that each of those three things are at the forefront of our mind. And as I mentioned, the manual does recommend B and C, but it also gives us the option to choose B or C, whichever we think is most comfortable for us given the situation. And again, those three guiding principles, freedom of movement, arriving on time, and being in the best position possible, should be things and priorities that are at the forefront as we continue to make decisions about our starting position. Now, if we take a look here at some of the starting positions, specifically here in situations with no runners on and R3 only, a couple things here that we want to talk about. And as we mentioned here, B and C, it's important to note that this isn't necessarily your typical B and C that we would talk about in the two-umpire system. You can see the positioning here. Okay, number one, this isn't the same as B or C in the two-umpire system, but we don't want to be any further towards first or third base, and more so than that imaginary tangent line as you see depicted on the screen. So that's from the apex of the plate through the dirt circle in softball, or ultimately the dirt area where the grass meets the dirt of the mound as well. So you kind of take that tangent line. We want to be just to the inside of, not to the outside of that tangent line, nor do we want to be straight up the middle either, where we may be potentially in the batter's eye or something of that nature as well. So you can kind of see, number one, where exactly we're at relative to our B and C positions. And you can also see here that we should only be 1 or 2 steps in the outfield grass. Now, personally, I work a lot of fields in our district that have a little bit of a lip. I don't want to have to run in the outfield and try and overcome that lip, so I typically start like right on the dirt, right at the grass line, so that I don't have to worry about that dirt, that lip coming up. But again, we don't want to be too deep. We don't want our depth to be so deep in our initial starting position where we can't arrive to second base on time, or we can't rotate in the full or fill rotations on time as well. So just as we talked about last week, shorten up as U1 and U3, we want to make sure that we shorten up as U2 as well, so we can arrive on time where we need to be, while also affording movement, freedom of movement for the fielders. And again, we should be square to the plate. So these are some ideas here for our initial starting position. Now again, remember here that you have the option to choose either B or C with no runners on or R3 only. So as we talk about the B and C positions, not only then do you have the choice to do so with no runners on or R3 only, you've also then got the choice of B or C in all different types of permutations that you may have with situations regarding runners. So again, the purpose of today, as we talk about initial starting positions, is to provide you with some advantages and potentially even some disadvantages of both B and C and then allow you for yourself to choose which one you think is best for you while working as U2 in the 4-umpire system. So again, providing options, not necessarily what exactly you are supposed to do or what is, quote, right. Again, you have the choice to determine for yourself which then is better here for you. Now, a couple things here with no runners on and an R3 only. And some people ask, what are some of the determining factors which would choose B or C for you? So many people kind of think about the pitching versus the hitting. And will that make hitters more likely to pull the ball, or will it make hitters more likely to go backside? And some people want to be on that side. So for example, if you've got a really fast pitcher and a bunch of hitters that are late, they may be more likely to go to right field for right-handers. So you may want to go ahead and position in the B spot, a B position, so that if U1 leaves, you're a little bit closer to pick up in the fill rotation, for example. So again, those are some determining factors that may factor into the equation for you in deciding for yourself whether you're not to go B or C. Where you're at in the batting order, sometimes down and lower in the lineup, they're not necessarily going to hit it as hard. Sometimes they'll be more inclined to be late on the pitcher, so on and so forth. So for some people, that's a determining factor for the B or C position as U2 with no runners on or R3 only. Sometimes the positioning of the fielders will also dictate this, whether they're shading pull side or backside, whether they're shallow or deep. And then ultimately here, what I would probably suggest is that when choosing B or C, I would make the decision here, and this is kind of where I go, of what's required of me based upon each individual situation. So remember, on routine balls, either I'm going to be required to pivot or get to a point of second base opposite the throw. I'll have to cover first base if U1 leaves. And depending on the situation here, in this case here, it's no runners on and R3 only, I'll only be required to cover second base. So for me here, and kind of taking a look at all factors, generally what I try and do with no runners on and R3 only is probably take the B position more than I'd take the C position here in this case as well. Some people change over for lefties and righties. That's fine if you wanted to do that. But for me, it's all based upon what's required of me and the situation. So I kind of prioritize for myself what's required of me when choosing B or C. That may be the case for you. It may not be the case for you. But again, just some things to think about in determining whether or not B or C is appropriate for you with no runners on or R3 only. Remember here that we want to find the best path to afford freedom of movement, arrive on time, and then be in the best position possible. DJ, any questions or anything in the chat here regarding initial starting position here as U2 with no runners on or R3 only so far?
Yeah, fair point in regards to 50-70. Some people have fields that are 60 and 70 foot fields, and just understanding, and Steve made a point that he starts on the dirt on those fields just because typically that grass is going to be further back than just a standard 60 foot field. So definitely don't be afraid to be close to second base for sure.
Yeah, that's excellent. Excellent stuff. Shorten it up so that we can get to where we need to be and afford freedom of movement. Absolutely. Good points there, DJ and Steve. So thanks for sharing that one. Let's take a look at some of the responsibilities that U2 has on balls on the infield and then routine balls to the outfield. Now, again, on the infield, there's more of like, hey, this is what you should do. And then when the ball is in the outfield, the manual will definitely talk about pivoting in on routine balls. And then there's also some movement towards the wedge, which Tom has kind of given us some latitude to go ahead and use if we're comfortable with it as well. So on the infield, there's kind of a prescription where we have to follow. And then with routine balls to the outfield, we can either pivot in, as the manual definitely tells us, or we can opt out to use the wedge and kind of use some variety of mechanics there too. So I'll kind of talk about what that may look like here as well. Let's first start here with the balls on the infield. I've kind of got this broken down into two different categories. So here's a play from the World Series. It's a pop-up to the second baseman. And whether it's a pop-up to the second baseman, a ground ball to the second baseman, or whatever it might be, we want to move in from our initial starting position as U2 into taking a position at second base, just in case we have an overthrow or some type of action there. So we should see U2 move on this one to at least point of base here with the ball in the infield. So bat a ball in the infield, in this case it's a fly ball. It would be the same if it was a ground ball here, but we want to see the umpire move to point of second base to get the runner sliding at us. Now here, this individual, the second baseman, makes a catch and then tries to fire the ball back to first base. The ball scrams away, goes to the backstop, and then ultimately is going to be we'll have a play on R1 going into second base. Here you can take a look at U2. He's done a great job of moving to point of base and adjusting with the throw here. Remember, the goal here is to get the runner sliding at you on tag plays. So runner sliding at you on tag plays, and to keep your head and eyes between the tag and the runner. And that's exactly what we see this umpire accomplish by moving to point of base first on this play on the infield. And then secondly, with this tag play developing, we get the runner sliding at the umpire, and the umpire is able to keep his head in between the runner and the fielder. So an excellent job here by the umpire. Now, some of you may be wondering, well, why can't I just pivot in here? And one kind of thing to think about is if you were to pivot in, think about where this throw would eventually kind of come from. So remember, this ball goes out of, is an overthrow, doesn't go out of play, but it goes to the screen, and then it's thrown back actually from the catcher who trailed the batter runner up to first base. So you kind of think about that angle that you may have accomplished on the inside. You could potentially be in the way of the throw here to second base, especially with the tight nature of the 60-foot diamond. So again, we want to see on these infield balls on the infield, move to point of second base as this umpire does. And then for tag plays, we want the runner sliding at you with your head and eyes in between the runner and the fielder. Now, there's also situations here to think about regarding double plays where we have force plays at second base. And because we have the 4-umpire system, U2 has no responsibilities whatsoever back at first base. So there's kind of a specific mechanic, if you will, to follow as U2. And that is then to basically stay on the play at second base. So in this case, and in all cases, anytime we have a force out at second base, as U2 has here, we should see U2 keep his or her eyes focused on the play. There is absolutely no need for U2 to look at the back end of this double play at first base. He or she is not going to be required to give any information there. He or she, the second base umpire, needs to make sure that they take a look at second base throughout the complete duration of the play so that, number one, we get the call right, and then secondly, if there's any potential interference, obstruction, or anything goofy, we want to keep our eyes on that play. So there's no need for U2 to move his or her eyes to first base to catch the back end of the double play. We want to make sure here that we're fixated on all the action here. Now, that doesn't mean we can't take a look at first base because you may want to know where the ball's at, but throughout the complete duration of the play, we want to have focus on this slide attempt to make sure then that everything is good to go. Now, in this case here, U2 does a good job of keeping his eyes on the play. You can see his eyes are down on this one. The runner actually kind of slides a little bit to the outside. There's contact that's made. The umpire basically rules here that that contact ended up in an errant throw by that fielder, and as a result called interference on R1 into second base. So again, as you take a look here at the work of this umpire, we want to kind of have a couple different priorities here. Number one, we've already talked about staying on the play, but as we move into position, we want to make sure here that, as you see on the bottom of the screen, we can accomplish our priorities. Number one, see the ball into the glove. And sometimes that may require us to drift or reposition. So as we think about whether or not we want to be in B or C with R1 only situations, think about what's easiest for you to see the ball into the glove. That may dictate whether you start in B or C. So that's the first priority, see it into the glove, and we can drift to the midline if necessary for that one too. We then secondly want to see that exchange of the fielder so that we have a clear voluntary release, or if there's no control, we were able to rule on that one as well. So see the ball into the glove, we want to make sure we see that one. We also want to continue to drift to be able to see the exchange. And then lastly, stay on the play. We don't want to fixate our eyes ahead of the play towards the back end, just in case we have, as we do here, as at least the umpire rules here, interference in this case as well. Okay, so a couple things to consider there as U2 with this double play mechanic. See the ball into the glove, make sure that we get the transfer, and then lastly, stay on the play. Don't get your eyes towards the back end of the double play. Now again, those priorities may be easier for from the B position. They may be easier from the C position for you. Just a couple things to think about here when selecting B or C with R1 only situations, as we'll continue to discuss here later today. See the back end of it. Now, again, that concept of B or C will continue to come up here, and we'll continue to kind of talk about that once we get into runners and situations and things like that. That was kind of the routine balls on the infield. Move to point of base on those routine balls on the infield, and if we have a double play, make sure we stay on the double play here. Routine balls to the outfield. Remember, the umpire then here, U2, can either pivot into the working area if he or she wants to, or you can work point of base, whichever you decide is best for you. Now, ultimately here, the tag plays, as we kind of know here, are best kind of seen from that runner sliding at you vantage point with your head and eyes in between the runner and the fielder. But some of us still may want to go ahead and pivot in. Again, you're allowed to pivot in by the manual. You're allowed to use point of base. So you get to kind of choose which mechanic you prefer to use. Now, I'm going to talk about point of base here because it's a little bit easier, and I've got some clips here of umpires pivoting in as well. Again, my goal is not to try and convince you of one way or the other, but rather present you some of the advantages and disadvantages so that you for yourself can decide whether you're somebody that wants to pivot all the way into the working area on these routine balls to the outfield, or do you want to work point of base. Here in this clip, we've got a routine ball to the outfield. So the batter has swung and he's got that one into right field. You can take a look at our second base umpire here now. He is moving into the direction of point of base opposite the throw. So what we mean by that is the ball is in right field. Point of base opposite the throw. Here, the point of second base is that not necessarily the point that's directed at home plate, but that back edge, kind of where the fielder's feet are. So we're at point of base. You can see this umpire goes ahead and moves into position. Point of base opposite the throw. The runner would be sliding at this umpire if there was a tag play on the batter runner at second base in this case, and chest to ball. Okay, so again, on routine balls to right field, if you're somebody that's not wanting to pivot in, you move to point of base here, and then you take the point of base opposite the direction of the throw while remaining chest to ball. So a good look at that here. Here's a look of it with it in action. Again, ball to right field. You can see this umpire started in the B position. So if he is going to get to a point of base opposite the throw, he's got to get to the other side of the infield, to which he does. You can kind of see here, that's exactly where this umpire is. And for many people who decide to use point of base over pivoting in, this is kind of why they decide to use point of base rather than pivoting into the working area. That's because if this ball gets cut off, as it does here, and there's a play back on, in this case, the batter runner at second base, you're not necessarily in that direct line of that throw towards second base as well. So on these routine plays, yes, you can pivot in. The manual does give that one to us, but you can also work point of bag, and then ultimately point of bag here would mean that we wouldn't necessarily have to slip to the outside to be out of the way of a throw that may go to the cutoff. So just a couple things to think about as to whether or not you decide to pivot into the working area versus work point of base. What does that look like here for center field? Well, here's a ball to center field. Okay, you see our second base umpire there is in the B position. He goes ahead and goes around to point of bag opposite the throw. In this case, we want the runner sliding at us. So this umpire goes kind of to the left side as you see here. If there was a play at second base, as you see here, you too would be in position with the runner sliding at him, and he would be able to get his head and eyes in between the runner and the throw. Another good look here at you two with the ball in center field. Again, moves to point of base, chest to ball. Again, another option for you other than pivoting into the working area. Here's a look at pivoting into the working area with the ball in center field. Not a horrible look inside the working area, but remember that as time has kind of evolved, we've learned that on tag plays, the best angle or the best look possible is usually runner sliding at you in between the runner and the fielder, and that's kind of exactly where we see this camera here. Now you can pivot in, as this umpire has done in the clip, but you'll see that one of the disadvantages towards pivoting into the working area is that oftentimes this can place the runner in this case, or even the fielder in some cases as well, between you and the tag attempt, and that could increase the likelihood of you getting straight lined on this play at second base. Now again, this isn't a horrible position. This umpire has done a really good job of shortening up. His distance is great to second base, and he is in a good position here too. But as we've kind of evolved in the umpiring field, we've learned here that through camera angles and replay, our best look for tag plays is runner sliding at us with head in between the runner and the fielder, rather than pivoting to the inside here in this case as well. So in the previous clips, we've kind of talked about that secondary play back into second base and kind of giving fielders freedom of movement here. In this case, again, this umpire's got a really good look. You can get a really good look from the working area here for this play at second base, but at the same time, it does put you between the runner and the field and the tag attempt. It puts the runner between you and the tag attempt, which could, in some cases, increase the likelihood of being straight lined. The last kind of segment that I'll cover, and then I'll take some questions on this one here, is plays to left field. Again, routine balls to the outfield. Instead of pivoting in, you can also have that option to point of second base opposite the throw with the ball in left field. Here is that umpire moving to the point of base opposite the throw, and you'll see here in the next clip kind of where we get that wedge look here in this case as well. Okay, so again, we get this ball to left field. Good job here by our third base umpire to get on the line here for fair foul. Ball's in left field, and then let's take a look at the job of our second base umpire here. He's at point of base, And then you can see the wedge look here. We can't necessarily get to runner sliding at you because that would put us in the way of the throw and even the lateral track of the fielder. So that's why we go to point of base opposite the throw, so we can remain chest to ball and out of the lateral track. And then you can see this umpire, through controlled movements, get his head in between the runner and the fielder here and see this tag attempt. So that is where we essentially get our wedge look here, because remember that wedge is 360. DJ, I see some things in the chat here. What we got?
Just honestly, just discussing the outcome of a play that was on a previous clip. We can definitely post game that. Just want to reiterate, and I can reshare the links, but Stu started to use some verbiage, the lateral movement, staying tracks and stuff like that. Make sure your guys are checking out those clips that we provided in the chat with Will Little as far as wedge at second base and stuff like that. As Stu said there at the very end, the wedge theory is 360. There are two wedges to every play, and that particular play, kind of being on the backside, is a different look by all means, but it's still there. We're still right in that window, as he said, fielder, ball, runner, and that's what we need. So make sure you're checking those links out as well for a little bit more detailed explanation. I'm going to redrop them for any late joiners.
All righty. Couple other situations, and again, you have complete freedom to decide B or C. So we just want to give you some food for thought in making the decision between B or C. You can see here with runners on, so R1 only, and in this case R1 and R3, you may have a steal attempt at second base. And if you kind of go back to those principles of potential tag plays and even think about force outs at second base with that double play, is it the B or C positions that give you the best look possible, not only at the double play mechanic, but even then for steal plays at second base? So again, some of those determining factors, what's required of you, steal plays. If we get the wedge look, remember that's runner sliding at us, head and eyes between the runner and the fielder. Routine balls, where can we get to at point of base opposite the throw? And then what exactly is required of us in rotation? If U1 leaves, might we want to be somewhere else? So there's some things to kind of prioritize. Obviously, plays if you're at your base should kind of take priority as to whether you choose B or C. But again, the manual does give you some freedom to choose either the B or C position in every situation that's out there. So again, we kind of want to give you some ideas here just to consider as you continue to move and try and select either B or C. And again, regardless of what you choose, it should afford freedom of movement, allow you to arrive on time, and then be in the best position possible. And for tag plays, we know that's runner sliding at you, head between the runner and the fielder. And in this case, if you've got a double play, we want to see the ball into the glove, see the transition, and then obviously stay on the play. Let's take a look here at some clips to kind of decide whether or not B or C is a better spot for us here with steal plays and back picks at second base. Now, I'll start with the major league clip here. This umpire has obviously started in C. It's a very narrow C. So if you remember, our guideline still that tangent line from the apex of the plate through the dirt circle, and then inside is where we want to be. So here, this umpire is going to take this steal play at second base from the C position. He literally walks into it. You can see here from the C position as he walks into it, he's got runner sliding at him. His head and eyes are between the runner and the fielder, and he has a great look at this tag attempt. And one thing I love about this clip and this play is it kind of shows us the angle that the umpire has from C and what we might get if we just go ahead and continue to work what we've kind of always been taught from B. If we were to just step in from B, this would be the look that you would get. And again, you've got the runner here between you and the fielder. Now, probably by this look, if you're in B on the outside, you're probably calling him out. B on the outside, you're probably calling him out. But as we take a look at some of these replays and as we go kind of closer to second base and even the backside of second base, we begin to see here, and even here on this B side, if we step in, we're still kind of straight lined on this one too. All right, so we may not get this call right if we kind of take this one just by stepping in from B. But if we move to the backside, and again, remember, wedge is 360, so there's two wedges to every play, as I mentioned and DJ mentioned. You've got the wedge angle that U2 actually has in this play, and then this camera angle gives us that same look. And if we take a look at this one frame by frame, we can see here that the fielder never tags the runner. Where we were probably straight line from the B position, we are not straight line on this one from the C position. So we kind of reduce the likelihood of us getting straight lined if we decide to go ahead and take steal plays on the backside from the C position. All right, you can kind of see again, from B you get straight lined. And obviously here from the C position or from that wedge look, we can see that he misses the tag. Here you can see our umpire in this case, he's in that C position. Probably can shorten up just a little bit here too, but he literally runs right into it. You can see he's got the runner sliding at him, head and eyes between the runner and the fielder. Tag attempt, good proper use of eyes, really good look there. Now you can also get this look from B. Okay, so you just have to move a little bit towards the backside. So this umpire, as we kind of get ready to see the wide angle view, moves from the B position to where this umpire took it from C. Okay, and obviously here on that backside, we're able to see this tag attempt, this tag angle, a lot more clearer than we could otherwise see from B on the outside. Again, the runner would be between us and the tag attempt if we were still on the outside in B. Here's a great look here of this umpire working the wedge for this steal play from the B position. So you can still get it from the B position if that's someplace that you want to be. You just have to continue to move towards the backside, which this umpire does, as did the previous umpire, and then find the wedge. Runner sliding at you, head and eyes in between the runner and the fielder. Fielder actually missed the runner on this one. It was one that was sent to replay. We could never see him actually tag it. Now, again, remember that anytime that we just step in from B, which is kind of an older teaching, and this is an older clip here, we kind of see here that the runner can be between us and the fielder in the tag attempt, and that could increase the likelihood of us being straight line on a variety of different plays. And that's ultimately why many people are suggesting here to potentially take them from C, or if you're in the B position, move to the backside so that you keep your head and eyes in between the runner and the tag attempt with the runner sliding at you. Now, the inverse would kind of be true here with second base occupied. Kind of go through those same factors, what's required of you. But again here, if we want runner sliding at us, potentially the B position is more where we would likely to be here so that we don't necessarily get straight line on a back pick into second base with second base occupied. Let's take a look here at some of these concepts here with second base occupied. Again, if we use the B position, just as we saw with the C position on steal plays, the B position on back picks allows us to kind of walk right into this one. I think this umpire probably started a little too deep, which requires him to kind of bump into the second baseman a little bit. But nonetheless, he's got runner sliding at him, and he's got his head and eyes in between the runner and the fielder, which is kind of the angle that we want to work with here. So potentially then B with the runner at second base may be a better spot than C, depending on who exactly you are. Again, if we use kind of some of those older teachings and use C with R2 only, remember here that this will oftentimes, if we just step in on these back pick plays, put the runner between us and the tag attempt, which does increase the likelihood of us getting straight line on the tag attempt. So again, maybe us taking this play from the B side rather than the C position would be a better look here and give us a more flexibility, I guess you could say, to get the best look possible at these plays. DJ, what we got in the chat here so far on these steal plays?
Nothing. You're doing fine.
All right. The last thing here then to go ahead and talk about is the concept of slipping to the outside or ultimately rimming here. So if you kind of think about it, we've given some food for thought, and this is kind of the last concept for us to go ahead and discuss. We've given some thought here as to whether or not on routine balls you should pivot into the working area, which you can do by the manual, or should you work point of base on these routine balls? And again, that decision's yours and what exactly you want to do. Now, we've talked about the viewing angles that we can get here too, but some things here definitely to consider here. I call it the play after the play here with regards to rimming or sliding. If you're somebody that's going to work point of base, you're going to end up rimming. If you're going to be somebody that has to rotate into the working area or whatever it might be, then you probably work the concept of slipping. So let's first go ahead and start with rimming. So again, here we have a routine ball to the outfield. We have a routine ball to the outfield. In this case, it's center field. And you can see here that U2 has basically taken a position at point of base on the right side. And then as this throw clears him, he begins to position for the play after the play. In this case, it will be on the batter runner at second base. So let's say here that the catcher decided to cut this one off and then go to second base with this one to try and retire the batter runner at second base. If we were on the inside, we may be in the way of that throw towards second base. And if we're on the outside here, as we started on the right side at point of base, we move over to the left side once that throw clears us so that we get the runner sliding at us. And then we can go ahead and keep our head and eyes in between the runner and the fielder. Okay, so that's essentially rimming here, and that would be if we decide to use point of base on routine rather than pivoting in. Now, again, you can pivot into the working area if you would like to on routine balls, or you can go ahead and use point of base. Either is yours on those routine balls. However, if we are required to rotate because one of our wing umpires decides to go out for catch, no catch on a trouble ball, we obviously have to move into the working area oftentimes because our responsibilities, in this case with runners at first and third, runners are in scoring position, so we're going to be using then, in this case, case, as we're going to see here, the fill rotation. So here we have a fly ball to right field. We see U1 give chase to it. It's a ball on the line, does a great job of straddling the line here. He points fair. And then as you see here again, remember the situation. U1 is out. Runners are in scoring position. So U2 has to pivot into the working area and maintain responsibilities at first and second base in the field rotation. Now, as we kind of see this throw come in, the batter runner is going to try and make this a triple. So the umpire here, U2, has worked himself to the lead runner. I'm sorry, to the trail runner. He's worked himself to the trail runner. And now there's no way here, because that runner's already touched second base, that we're going to have any play back at first base. So as we see U2 come into the clip, you'll see that he is inside. He had moved with that trail runner, the batter runner, to second base as the batter runner achieved a double. You can see here the batter runner was trying to stretch this into a triple. Here the umpire is positioned in the middle of the infield. The throw gets cut off here, and the throw goes back to second base. And in this case, this umpire's done a great job of slipping to the outside, because he knows his best viewing angle for a play at second base here is to go ahead and get the runner sliding at him and to keep his head and eyes in between the runner and the fielder. And that's exactly where we see this. So again, you kind of got two options here in terms of routine balls. Either you can pivot into the working area or you can stay outside with routine balls. That then would require us, if you stay outside, rimming to make sure that we get the runner sliding at us based upon the situation. The other thing too here with regards to pivoting into the working area, particularly in rotation, is once we work ourselves back to the lead run, back to the trail runner, once we work ourselves back to the trail runner, and there's only one base for us to be responsible for, as we see in this clip, you can then slip to the outside to again get the runner sliding at you for any play, potentially back into the base, to keep your head and eyes in between the runner and the fielder. Now, again, what's kind of important for us to make sure that we realize here about this system for U2 is that he or she, as U2, you guys have the option to choose either B or C respectfully, or whatever you want to decide to do based upon those situations. And hopefully today we've kind of outlined some of the positives, some of the negatives of using B or C situationally, and at the same time have highlighted on routine balls whether or not pivoting in is a good option for you, or whether staying on the outside working point of base is a better option for you as well. So those were kind of the major themes here for us to talk about today. Remember, for tag plays, the best look possible, as we know with the wedge, is runner sliding at us with head in between the runner and the fielder, and regardless of B or C, pivot it in or stay out. That's ultimately what we want to work to achieve. Whether you're ready for that or building towards that one, that then would be the ultimate goal. DJ Seth, anything here to go ahead and add and contribute here before we go ahead and get ready to close things out for us?
All good.
All righty. See a couple things in the chat. We'll revisit that here when we go ahead and break. Appreciate everybody's attention. This will be the last episode for us for a long while. A lot of us are in the throes of the district tournament, states and sectionals and things like that coming up for many. And then obviously want to give people some time to enjoy the regional tournament and then ultimately the World Series tournaments coming up to us in late August here. So we won't be back on with 3 Up 3 Down until September, probably after Labor Day. We'll probably pump a couple things out there for many people to use and continue to reference. But nonetheless, appreciate everyone. Huge thank you to DJ. Huge thank you then to Seth as well, and to many of you for not only your feedback and your ideas, but also your participation and viewership. So we appreciate everyone here throughout 2020 and 2021. Huge thank you for everyone. I hope many of you guys have gotten a lot out of our 3 Up 3 Down episodes to take out onto the diamonds. Other than that, everyone, we'll see you back in September, the fall of 2021, for our next kind of series here. Wish everybody the best of luck during the tournament season. For those of you guys working states, sectionals, districts, the regional tournament, or even the World Series, good luck, and we'll be back on then in September. Thanks again, everyone. We'll see you then.